So as the 2025 AFL trade period was going, I was getting a ton of different questions about a ton of different teams. And of course, one of the biggest questions I think that got asked to me quite regularly on a bunch of different videos did happen to be what, potentially is going on with the Gold Coast Suns and why were they actually trading so many players? Because as we know, members of the Gold Coast Suns were flat out saying in interviews that they don't like to give away good players. They want to keep depth and they overall don't want to move on players if they had to. But we saw a lot of different teams have players request trades and them say no. Like, for example, Zach Merritt, requested a trade, really wanted out of Essendon, all of the above, but Essendon just flat out said no, they didn't trade him, and whether we think that's a good idea or a bad idea, it doesn't matter in this context. They decided not to trade him, and a couple other teams were very similar, like St Kilda refusing to trade Rowan Marshall. But the Gold Coast Suns, in saying that they wanted to keep depth and they wanted to, they didn't want to give away good players and they wanted to retain some guys, still decided to trade away pretty much everyone and their dad who requested a trade. And there were some good names in there. So a lot of people have been asking the question, well, what was the goal behind this? Why did the Gold Coast Suns overall do this? And, are they going to have enough depth to go into next year and, of course, make finals and continue to succeed, which they were able to do in 2025? And I've got the answers to all of those questions. Before I get into some of the players and who departed and their inclusions and why this all happened, to answer the simple question, yes, I think Gold Coast are a massive chance to make finals. In fact, even though they actually traded and moved on 5 different players, I don't even believe they got worse. I actually think they got a whole lot better. Let me explain. So we look at some of the players that they traded. Malcolm Roses was, I think, the first one where Gold Coast received 51, 69 and moved Roses and 62. Now, Roses wasn't getting a game at Gold Coast. He was a bit out of favour and he wasn't seeming like he was going to crack Damien Hardwick's team at all, and he probably wasn't ever going to crack his team. So Gold Coast were pretty happy to move him on. At the end of the day, he was a depth player and he was just playing VFL footy. So not really a worrying sign at all. Then you got one which I think made a lot of sense for Gold Coast to move on, which did happen to be Connor Buderick, where the Suns received pick 37 and they moved on from Connor Buderick and pick 70. Now, unfortunately for Buderick, he was in a really weird situation because even though he was getting a game for Gold Coast, a lot of the footy he was being played for them was, quite frankly, out of position, and he was playing some sub footy, all of the above. He just didn't seem like he was a guy the Suns had with a solidified spot. And I definitely feel like going into 2026, Buderick probably wouldn't have been in the team anymore. So he got traded to a team that needed backmen. And at the end of the day, it wasn't really a loss because he would have been playing VFL footy in 2026. So the first 2 guys, straight up, you lose, are blokes who are going to be playing VFL footy next year. Then for them, they unfortunately lost 3 guys, which I think were pretty good. Brian Fiorini, they of course lost for a future 3rd round selection. Again, he was playing VFL for the majority of the year before he cracked into the team at the end of the year. But at the end of the day, again, he only just cracked into the team towards the end of the year. Even though he played a role and did really great, the Gold Coast Suns have some academy players to bring in. They're going to be bringing in players through the draft this year. Some players are developing who are coming through. And Fiorini might not have even been a consistent AFL player next year. So you look at the 2 big ones, which were Ben Ainsworth and Sam Flanders. First of all, Sam Flanders, again, like Buderick, he was being played out of position. He wasn't in their midfield. They preferred him to go and play other positions because they're not going to send a Rao or an Anderson to go play down forward consistently. They knew that Flanders had the capability to do it, so they moved him up there. So, at the end of the day, they traded a guy who was out of position, but, and still got a decent package for him, which they were able to use later on. Then, we look at Ben Ainsworth. Ben Ainsworth got a game, every week this year, and he was really good for the most part. But Gold Coast have players like a Jake Rogers coming through who could be taking Ben Ainsworth's spot in, the year or two coming up. If I had to say out of all these players, the biggest losses were definitely Flanders and Ainsworth. The only thing with Ainsworth is I feel like they didn't need to trade him just yet. Like, they could have sat on this for a year. But there were clearly reasons why they traded these players. First and foremost, cap space. They actually cleared off a lot of cap space moving on Flanders and Ainsworth, and they didn't have to give extensions to the other guys or anything like that. They move on from all of them, save themselves a little bit of cap space, and of course in all these trades they actually brought in a decent amount of assets that they were able to use to go and trade for Jamarra Ugle-Hagan and Christian Petrarca. Not only did they trade in for those two guys, they actually have a bunch of academy players coming up in this upcoming draft who will quite frankly be much cheaper than all the players I've previously mentioned, and a couple of them will probably already slot in and be better than a couple of the players who they just traded. First of all, you look at this graphic here, and Gold Coast now sit with pick 15, 18, 24, 28, 29, 36, 52, 92, and 110, which should give them enough points to, of course, select the number 2 rated player in Zeke Uland and the number 4 rated player in Dylan Patterson. Both of these guys, I think, will automatically be better than, Roses. They could automatically be better than Butterick. I'm not sure about the other 3. They probably won't be better than them. But we got to remember, this is the number 2 and number 4 prospect now, which both of these guys should automatically be in contention to play in the 23 next year. So the Gold Coast Suns moved on these players for a reason. Yes, at the end of the day, it was perceived that they lost depth and, lost some good players. But in reality, the only players that they lost, which were really big L's, were probably Flanders and Ainsworth, who you didn't really want to lose, but they moved them on to get picks and assets to make other deals happen. They were able to bring in Petrarca, and they were able to bring in Uland and Patterson and Jamarra Ugle-Hagan, which overall gives their team a little bit of a different dynamic next year and helps them set up a little bit more. So because they were able to trade these players away, they brought in assets to obviously trade for Christian Petrarca, but obviously they freed up cap space as well to ensure that Petrarca gets in the team smoothly and they don't have to pay any of his contract. They only have to pay, they can pay all of his contract to Melbourne, and Melbourne don't have to, worry about paying some of his contract. That was, of course, something which could have complicated the trade. If Gold Coast wanted him but weren't willing to pay all of his contract, Melbourne might have actually backed out of it with them knowing that they were already paying Clayton Oliver a decent amount. But because Gold Coast now moved on all of these players and brought in the necessary, assets, they were able to give the assets to Melbourne, which pleased them, but they were also able to have enough cap space that they had freedom to be able to trade for him and guarantee his contract without Melbourne being scared that Gold Coast wasn't going to pay it all entirely. So there was a lot of reasons why they made these moves. But at the end of the day, yes, you lost 5 pretty decent players, but honestly, Track, Jamarra, Uland, and Patterson, these guys automatically come in, and all 4 of them could be in the best 23 straight away, when, only 2 or 3 of the guys I previously mentioned were really in that Gold Coast 23 going into next year. So the Suns do really well out of this. I think they actually moved on enough salary cap as well to maybe have even more room to look at next year and what that's going to look like. They brought in Rioli and Noble last year. They, of course, brought in Petrarca this year, maybe even next year, especially with Dimmo and all the players that want to play under him. Wouldn't even be surprised if he maybe looked at another guy and assessed the opportunities on who they maybe be able to get. But of course, I'd very much love to know all of your thoughts and opinions on this in the comment section down below. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for all the latest AFL content and news. My gaming/movie channel will also be getting linked down below. Go and check that out. And of course, you know, go subscribe to that. But yeah, most importantly, leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel for latest sports content and news, and I guess I'll be seeing you guys next time. Goodbye.